What's going on, my Restoration Dominators? Rico Garcia here. Another exciting episode. Before we jump in, remember, look, we want to hear from you. We've got so much love and support. We want to go ahead and hear your voice. We want to go ahead and give you a shout out live on the podcast. So how do you do that? Pick up the phone and dial 678-TALK. The number 2, and then us. So 678, talk to us. Drop us a voicemail. Let us know who you are, where you're from, what you like about the show, who you'd like to see, some of your biggest takeaways, some of your best ideas that maybe, guess what? Maybe we haven't covered it on the show yet. We want to go ahead and hear from you. We want to play your voice back on the podcast. Our way of saying thank you for being an amazing listener, for being an amazing supporter of the Restoration Domination Podcast. Today, we have a really exciting episode that we're going to be diving into. But before we talk about that, first things first, I want to give a big shout out to our 2 platinum sponsors for the Restoration Domination Show. First and foremost, Brittany Alexander, better known as Lawyer Brit, which has her very own monthly Legal Corner episode that we are dropping, again, each and every single month, live for you to go ahead and keep you abreast of what's going on with all things legal, all things contracts, some case studies, and also some additional bonuses there that she's going to be bringing to the table every once in a while. So Lawyer Brit with the Legal Corner. And then secondly, Carlos Machine, the Claims Machine, with the Public Adjusting Corner, again, dropping one additional bonus episode each and every single month, talking about, again, policy changes, how restoration contractors can work with public adjusters, the benefits to not only use a restoration contractor, but also to your customer, and how to create raving fans, and so much more. And also, knowing that they have these 2 spots each and every single month. If you haven't checked out the episodes, make sure that you go back, check those episodes out. But this is also a great opportunity if you've ever had a legal question or a public adjusting question or a policy question or, a case study that maybe you've hit a brick wall on. This would be a great opportunity for you to pick up the phone, dial 678-TALK to us, and leave them a question, leave them a comment, and we will answer that live specifically for you. So getting into the show, today we are joined by Doug Quinn, which is the executive director at the American Policyholders Association, APA, and we're talking all things policy and really bringing to the forefront some of the conversations that have been had in the restoration arena, which is talking about basically insurer fraud, but not necessarily from the homeowner or the business owner standpoint, but bad faith on the side of the insurance carriers and some of the techniques that they've been using, and also how we can protect ourselves along the way, and how we should be informing our customers, how we should be educating ourselves on the things to look out for. So this is a really interesting episode. Tons of information is being covered. Doug Quinn and the APA is really doing a lot within the insurance industry to help advocate on behalf of the homeowner. He's got a very interesting story as to how he even got into this whole thing. Before we jump in, big shout out to CNR Magazine, one of our show sponsors. If you haven't gotten your subscription yet, head on over to cnrmagazine.com, hit the big red subscribe button, go ahead and get your subscription today. And also a big shout out to Company Cam, but we'll talk a little bit more about them later. So without further ado, let's get into the show. Let's go.
Owning any type of restoration business is demanding of your time, your energy, and resources. And that's why we're here. This is Restoration Domination. If you're a contractor in water mitigation, mold remediation, biohazard cleanup, roofers, or public adjusters, you'll learn how to dominate using some of the techniques and strategies that our guests will share. We'll interview top industry insiders, movers and shakers, hustlers and hackers, and anyone dominating their industry. This is Restoration Domination. Hustle, hack, and dominate. And here's your host, Rico Garcia.
All right, we are live. Doug, thank you so much for being on the show today, man. Quick question. Are you ready to help us dominate?
I'm ready to help.
Let's go. All right. So do me a favor, man. For those that may not be familiar with the name, may not be familiar with APA, kind of give us a short and sweet intro, fill in some of the gaps so that everybody knows exactly who you are.
American Policyholder Association is a nonprofit organization that focuses primarily on insurance company fraud, and that is fraud perpetrated by insurers, the third-party administrators, the engineers, and the adjusters that they hire, as well as licensing violations perpetrated by licensed professionals such as engineers and adjusters hired by the insurance industry.
So how did you kind of get into this whole realm?
It happened to me. I mean, I was an investment advisor, living the dream as a single guy living on the water up in New Jersey, and Superstorm Sandy came in and wiped out my house, which is not a big deal. I'm an insurance, financial guy. I believe in insurance. I still believe in insurance. It's a very important financial tool. I had the maximum legal amount of flood insurance I could buy, and my company committed fraud. They paid me 37 cents on the dollar. They hired an engineering firm to come out and create a fraudulent report to say that there was pre-existing damage and earth movement that cracked my foundation, which conveniently is an exclusion from flood insurance, so they don't have to pay. And then once we got done, we actually caught them in a very large scandal up in the Northeast. We had the Attorney General of New York raid an engineering firm, find out that even when the on-site engineer was agreeing that there was damage, his firm would change the report to say, sometimes as simple as adding the word not. He would say, structure was damaged by storm forces, and then they would just add the word not. Structure was not damaged by storm forces. So we were able to have one of their executives arrested. It was a very large scandal, and that one criminal arrest was able to get something like 144,000 claims reopened, and somewhere to the tune of $350 million of additional monies paid out to people who had been cheated.
Right. Most people hear insurance fraud and they don't think about the insurance carriers. Typically, they're thinking about a homeowner, they're thinking about a building owner, they're thinking about a contractor, thinking about roofers, right? But it happens on both sides of the equation. It happens, again, homeowners are doing it, it happens. You hear about it all the time. Roofers have done it, but on the same time, so do the insurance carriers, right? So like, what are some of the subtleties that are almost blatant, that are almost common practice, to where we see insurance carriers kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again? And if it's not completely 100% fraudulent, are really teetering on that line. Is there anything that you see on a consistent basis that's happening?
There's quite a few things, and you're correct. It happens on all sides, and all fraud is wrong. All fraud should be enforced. However, an overwhelming majority, if not all, of insurance fraud prosecution is done to defend insurance companies. You'd be hard-pressed to have insurance fraud department who could say, yes, we've gone after this many insurance companies. They are generally going against the consumers, the contractors, the professional criminals, and yes, some of them should be locked up. But our message is fraud happens on all sides. It should be enforced on all sides. Occasionally, there'll be somebody from the insurance company, like an agent who keeps premiums, who steals from the insurance company. Those guys get prosecuted. Right. But for the most part, insurance industry itself is immune from prosecution. You'll see very, very few instances, and I will challenge any fraud prosecution department and Attorney General's office or CFO or insurance department to show me the numbers of charges that they've pressed against, in defense of insurance companies versus against insurance companies. I would love for somebody to show me those numbers. I've seen a hint of a few. And so the kind of tactics, to answer your question, that we'll see are sort of blanket denials. They'll call something that is clearly wind damage, wear and tear on the roof. They'll call something not attributable to that particular event, like maybe there was hail on this day, and they'll they'll be like, no, it didn't happen. It happened prior to that when you weren't insured with our company. It was a previous storm. We will see quite a few just flat out denial of damage. We will see cut and paste reports that are put out there where they'll use sort of your engineering report on my house, but they'll change the name and saying there was no damage. We get complaints about, a lot of it is, look, do I think the executives in the C-suite of State Farm and Allstate are up there saying, let's defraud Mrs. Smith out of her home?
Right.
No, I don't necessarily think that's the case. There may be a degree of that they're complicit due to a lack of supervision, but, down the chain of command, it tends to be lower level employees. It tends to be a lot of the third parties they're hiring, third party administrators who have check writer bias, the engineers that they're hiring, the independent adjusters that they're hiring. I'm not saying that they're all fraudulent, but, listen, even if it's just 5 or 10% of the market, that's millions of people that they're impacting.
Right, exactly. Do you think I guess really we have to go back a little bit and just really get into the whole psyche of why why there's not a lot more cases brought up against, the insurance carriers themselves. Is it just because of how big the industry is, or once upon a time, how trustworthy of an industry it was, or just how most people, when they think insurance, because again, look, we're kind of indoctrinated, right? You can't turn on, and we were talking off camera about this, you can't turn on the TV, you can't turn on the radio without hearing one of these overly, comforting commercials about, how well you're going to be taken care of if you're part of this, right? They're sponsoring, the little league teams in the local communities, right? So there's just this feeling of, oh, wow, these are really great, individuals and a great organization. They're never going to let me down. Do you think that part of that, do you think that is part of the reason why, in conjunction just with the enormous amount of capital that they have, why most organizations just aren't pursuing them?
There's a couple of dynamics. So part of it is, the advertising budget is part of it. Look, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars telling us what a great friend they are for us and what a great job they're doing for us. And for the most part, that's probably true. Look, to be clear, insurance is a very important financial tool for the average American to withstand a loss that would otherwise be catastrophic.
100%.
So we're not anti-insurance. We're very pro-insurance. We just want to see it work the way that they promise it to. So part of it might be the advertising. A lot of that is to induce people to the sale, to the table, to close and purchase a policy. But the reason why we see carrier side fraud, and P.S., it was not enforced to such a degree that there wasn't even a term. We actually had to coin the term when we started the APA, carrier side fraud or insurer fraud, because it didn't exist. There are some states where insurance fraud isn't even defined as an insurance company stealing from a consumer. It's called a one-way state. Their fraud statutes only define insurance fraud as fraud committed by a consumer or another party against an insurance company. So we actually had to come on and say, wow, this is such an unlevel playing field for the consumer. And the dynamic that happens and why insurance companies and their employees don't get prosecuted more often is because most fraud prosecutors, public prosecutors, are not going out and looking for insurance fraud. A large percentage of those cases are delivered to them by the insurance companies themselves. Every insurance company has an SIU, a special investigation unit, and it's basically like a detective bureau, right? They've got forensics experts, and they've got certified fraud examiners, and they've got investigators, and they'll have access to confidential information on a claim that nobody else has, inside info, and they basically are vetting these, looking at the information, they're vetting these cases, they're packaging them up, and they're walking them in to fraud prosecutors. In many cases, insurance money is funding or supplementing those fraud prosecutors' budgets through grants, premium taxes, etc. And there's a very good reason for that. It shouldn't all be on the burden of the taxpayer. However, it then in turn creates sort of this cozy relationship where the consumer is not represented. Because do we think if all insurance fraud cases are turned in, or a majority of them are turned in to prosecutors by the insurance companies themselves, do we think the insurance companies ever turn themselves in? Again, if that's out there and there's examples, please send me. If there's prosecutors out there who have examples of that, please send it to me. Please show me the examples. But I personally don't believe they turn themselves in for fraud. I believe they're turning everyone else in from stealing from them. And here's my point: who pays for that public fraud prosecution department? Who pays for the insurance department? Who pays for the CFO's office? Who pays for this whole mechanism to prosecute insurance fraud? Well, guess what? You and I do. The taxpayers do. And who pays for the insurance company SIUs? We pay, the premium payers. We pay for it. So if we fund this whole system, should not we as the general public also be protected under that umbrella? Shouldn't we also be protected from insurance companies and the vendors that they hire from defrauding us? And unfortunately, the way the system is set up, we are not. Okay. So that's why you will not see that, is because most cases originate from insurance companies, and then in turn, and they don't turn themselves in. So it's sort of a challenging part of our mission. The first couple of years that we formed the APA, we're a little bit over 3.5 years old now, and the first few years was just flying around the country, meeting with attorneys general, meeting with prosecutors, meeting with elected officials, and giving them the message: do you know that insurance companies and the vendors they hire commit fraud too? Because
So what was that like? Because again, you're flying around meeting these, high level individuals, and you're saying, hey, by the way, there's something really going on here. Right. And so how was that conversation? How was it received? Were people kind of looking at you like, what are you talking about?
It was challenging at first. Listen, they're public prosecutors. Any one of them can go out and as a private attorney make 5 times what they're making. They are committed public servants. They are trying to do the right thing and help people. And we know that. They just need a little bit of education. And they've only heard from insurance company lobbyists their whole career. People are stealing.
Right.
People are, again, which is true, which happens. It should be prosecuted. But they've never heard. And I can tell we're trained to look at people's body language and eye contact and tone of voice. I can tell when I'm talking to a prosecutor if they've heard this message, or I'm literally the first person that said this to them. And for many of them, I'm the first person that said this to them. So in the beginning, it was a little bit challenging. But now, obviously we have a much better reputation. In the beginning, nobody knew who we were. It's hard to go to a prosecutor who in many cases, district attorneys and attorneys general are elected officials, and say, hey, you don't know me. You've never heard of my organization, but here's a case against one of the most powerful industries in the country.
Right.
I want you to prosecute it. Oh, good luck when you go to get elected next cycle and they fund your opponent with a couple of $1 million because you upset them. So
right.
So they're
yeah, that could be a tough message, right?
Yeah, and like I say, they will do the right thing, but you've got to have a relationship. They have to trust you. They have to see you and know that you're for real. You don't have another agenda. You're not, trying to do something different or just trying to make money out of the deal. So, that's us as a nonprofit. Establishing our credibility was very, very important. And you can't, with the APA, you cannot be an executive with the APA. You cannot be on our board of directors if you make any money in the claims business. You can't be a plaintiff's attorney. You can't be a public adjuster. You can't be a restoration contractor, engineer. There can't be any kind of a profit motive involved. Nobody can look at us and say, like they do at the plaintiff's bar, or the trial bar. The trial attorneys make excellent arguments, but in the end, everyone always discounts it by saying they're just lawyers trying to get paid. Right. So we have to make sure that we are, a no motive, no agenda besides what we're trying to attempt to protect the general public. And of course, when they see that and they understand that, it's a lot easier. And we get calls from them now for meetings and for events and things. We get invited to the Attorney General's conferences, and we've had opportunities to speak at their conferences. it's a different world than it was in the beginning.
Right. Awesome. So, here's the thing, talking about insurance and every time that in our industry, in the restoration industry, the industry is kind of split in half, and we have, factions of belief systems. You've got people that really go after the restoration contractors that are on program work, right? They're dealing with third-party administrators, and it's a really good business model for them, and it's done really well for them, and they are great contractors, and they don't have a problem with the insurance industry as a general whole, right? Or even if they do, they don't vocalize it. Then there's this whole other camp that is like die hard. They don't care about the insurance carriers. They don't want anything to do with third-party administrators. It's all a scam. They're just screwing over the contractors. And it's anytime that we talk about insurance and third-party administrators, it's a very toxic subject because the market, everybody out there kind of, it's almost like you have to pick a side. I'm kind of always tried to been, rather neutral with the whole thing because I see both sides of the argument, right? Insurance, as you say, it's a must. I mean, it's an amazing financial tool. I don't think that anybody in their right mind would recommend to their, grandmother who lives in Florida to say, hey, you know what? Don't get homeowners insurance. Don't worry, you'll be fine during hurricane season. Like, no one's going to give that kind of advice, right? So I think that insurance is extremely important, but I don't think that it has to be such a toxic relationship between contractors and the insurance carriers. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to take place. I think the homeowners really need to be educated on the insurance process. I think the contractors really need to be educated on the insurance process and how it works and why claims are being denied and how to combat that, right? Because the more information that we have, the better conversation that we can have, the better that we can kind of set the stage for when we're presenting new, claims to the insurance carriers, things of that nature. So really broad question here. What do you think is the biggest piece of misinformation that contractors carry in their heads as they're filing claims with their homeowners for trying to get their invoices paid? What do you think is the biggest piece of misinformation that most contractors may walk into that scenario with?
Wow, that was a long lead up to that question.
It was. Well, because and again, this is important because when people hear these discussions, right? They're like, "Oh, you're anti-insurance." No, not necessarily. "Oh, you're anti-TPA." No, not at all. "Oh, you're just want to be totally independent." No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is information is key, and that you need to understand everybody's business model in order for you to make better and educated decisions about how you're going to address that individual, right? At least that's my opinion.
Sure. Well, I will say this. As I mentioned, I'm not in this business, so I don't necessarily have the depth of knowledge about restoration contracting or being a plaintiff's attorney or a public adjuster. I obviously see a lot what's going on and certainly know more than the average bear, but I will not weigh in on business techniques. I'll go a couple of routes on this. Thing one is our integrity has to come first. So if you're a business person in any business, and especially in this business where you're dealing with insurance, which should be a position of public trust, you do have a fiduciary capacity to do the right thing. The APA, there's a whole bunch of people involved that have a degree of being at odds with each other, right? Program work versus retail, and people that are doing attorneys and public adjusters fighting, and public adjusters are fighting with the contractors, and Republicans hate Democrats. And, what we have the benefit of doing is we are here to benefit the consumer. And if your business model is based on integrity and ethics, and your guiding principle is what's in the best interest of the consumer comes first, then a lot of these issues go away. So we always let people know, listen, you come into the APA tent, we are here for the consumer, and you put your differences aside. You want to have a knife fight on the front yard because you belong to different political parties or different business models or different industries, that's fine. But in the APA tent, we are here for the consumer. We put self aside and we stand up for people who don't have a chance to stand up for themselves. So the first thing is, if everyone just focused on our own integrity on both sides and putting the consumer first, there would not be as much conflict between contractors and the insurance industry. It just wouldn't exist. But again, or maybe it would be much lower because there's always misunderstandings. But if, people were, I always say this, we're in the best position to hold the insurance industry accountable if our hands are clean, if we are beyond blame ourselves, if we can stand up to scrutiny because we have those old school business ethics and we always do what's right for the consumer. Everyone makes a mistake. If we make a mistake, we make it right, even if it costs us money to make the consumer whole. We don't chase the quick buck. We're in business for the long term. These are all things that look, I was raised by old school Depression era parents. These are things that my parents taught me. A lot of the old heads in the business understand this, but there's a younger generation coming up. And sometimes I think we take for granted that everybody just kind of knows this. Sometimes it needs to be quantified and it needs to be spoken. So to answer your question, what is the one major mistake that contractors make when they go deal with insurance companies? I couldn't really say that.
Misconception is what I said. So, and again, because if you walk out your front door every morning and you think that every face you're gonna meet is an enemy, and that's going to skew the way that you interact with people, right? So to kind of put this in other terms, right? If I believe that every time that I have a customer, if I signed an assignment of benefits or a work order authorization, whatever that may look like for the individual company, my homeowner is filing a claim and I believe that I'm going to get screwed 6 ways from Sunday, right? Every single time that I go about this, well, I'm kind of probably already setting myself up for failure because I think that all insurance carriers are absolutely horrible and they're out to get little old me and my Betty Smith, my client, right? So that changes the dynamic. And part of that, I think, is just a misconception about how it works and how the insurance industry should work. And then where is it in the process that things start falling apart? And then as a contractor, if we understand that, I can say, hey, look, if this is how the industry works, and this is where we start seeing claims being denied, or engineering reports to start to get falsified, or whatever the case may be, well, now I know where to hedge myself. So that way I can defend myself as an honest contractor who's trying to do the best thing by my client. And that's really what I'm getting at, is the mindset on how to look at this. If you were a contractor, knowing what you know now with what you're doing with the APA, what are some of the things that you would probably look at objectively from a business standpoint?
First thing is, I know that I'm not billing for $1 more than I'm entitled to. And I'm certainly not putting a single thing on the scope of work that doesn't belong there, that the insured is not entitled to. And once I have that reassurance, right, because we always tell people, you do business as though a regulator is looking over your shoulder for every single piece of business, every single form. And guess what? One day they will be. But if your hands are completely clean and you're doing an honest, sincere job, you're in a much better position to fight for what your position is. You have the moral high ground. So, that's sort of what I would say is, number one, because I think people fall into this, well, they're going to cheat me down anyway, so I might as well start up here. Right? Because then they're going to beat me down to here and I'll be closer to where I should be. And guess what? The insurance industry is probably looking at it and saying, well, they're going to overstate it anyway, so I might as well start down here and maybe they'll fight me up to where it should be. So that's where maybe the conflict is coming from. Everyone's sort of starting at a higher or much lower position thinking they're going to negotiate in the middle. And I would suggest that if you, again, I'm not in this business. I'm not the person to be giving you business advice on how to run your company.
We're going to flash that on the screen, by the way. It's like public service announcement.
Yes. But I will say this is that, first things first, you don't bill for a penny more than you're entitled to. You don't put a single thing, you don't put a piece of wood or a nail on that scope of work or that bill that doesn't belong there. And once you've done that, then you fight like an animal for your position. You never quit, you never give up. If you know morally and ethically you are correct, then you never quit. You make sure that you fight to the death to make sure that the right thing is going to happen for that consumer. And I do know there are some certain states with UPPA laws that the contractor is limited to how they can advocate, or actually can't even use the word advocate. But at the same time, you do have a position, and within the legal realm of what you're permitted to do, you do everything within your power.
Yeah, and for us restoration contractors, it's really all about documentation and justifying what it is that you're doing, when you did it, and everything else. The better that your ducks are in a row as a restoration contractor, the easier the process is, because then even if you do have someone on the opposite end who's trying to poke holes at your estimate or at your scope of work, if you've got all of the pictures, all of your reports, all of this thing lined up, it's very difficult to, work you down, as you said, on your estimate, if it's a legit estimate or a legit invoice, I should say, and on that note, what I want to do is I just want to take a quick moment and thank our sponsors. And then as soon as we get back, we're going to go ahead and continue the conversation about how to protect yourself and protect your customers. So hang tight. Hey, Restoration Nation. So real quick, I want to talk about your estimates. And being in the restoration industry, look, we have to make sure that our documentation is super tight and it's on point. And we want to eliminate as much back and forth with the insurance carrier as much as we possibly can. And this is why I want to talk to you about Mpartial. And I really love the name because it's supposed to be impartial. Kind of get it? So the reason why this is such an amazing software is because it uses the technology that most of us are already using, which is the Matterport technology, and then basically makes this on steroids when it comes down to building your estimates. And Mpartial has three main offerings that I want to talk to you about real quick, starting off with Mpartial Scope. Now, when we're talking about Mpartial Scope basically allows you to generate a carrier-approved worthy estimate. And basically the way that it does this is by extracting all of the relevant data from pre-mitigation as well as your post-mitigation scans, and packages this up in such an amazing way to where it eliminates so much back and forth. And again, the whole idea as our industry evolves is to harness the power of this kind of technology. Not only that, but it also has another offering, which is Mpartial Embed. And basically what this does is it gives you the ability to go ahead and tag with highlights, your general scope notes, mitigation activity, moisture readings, and so much more information. You even have the ability to go ahead and upload JPEG pictures, PNG, ESX, and so much more right into the Mpartial tags, which makes your documentation that much more tight, which ultimately leaves less room for people on the other end to have much of an opinion as to what your estimate is about. Because again, this is all about harnessing real physical data. So not only that, there's obviously a lot of industries or a lot of instances where you're going to need to make some changes to your estimate. And lately what we've been seeing is a lot of back and forth between Xactimate and Symbility, which leads us to Mpartial Convert, where it basically takes any estimate and can change it between Xactimate and Symbility and vice versa, and really makes this entire process very, very easy. And we've got something really special for you, Restoration Nation, for listening to the show, watching the show, and it's an amazing offer that I want to go ahead and extend to you. And that is, if you head on over to info@Mpartial, and that's Mpartial.io/ Domination. And again, the link is going to be in the video description as well as in the show notes below. You're going to get an amazing offer, and that is a total of 99% off their enterprise plan. So just go ahead and visit info.mpartial.io/domination. Go ahead, check them out. You're going to be happy you did. Photo documentation is possibly one of the most important aspects of what it is that we do in the restoration business. Not only so that the client knows exactly what's going on, but also so that you can prove your work to insurance companies. One of the best ways that I've found to go ahead and document our projects is by using Company Cam. Company Cam is an amazing app. It has so many features, everything from time-stamped and GPS located photos, individual project files, unlimited photo storage, in-app communication with your crew, a live stream of all of your projects as the photos are coming in, as if it was an Instagram feed. So from a managerial standpoint, Company Cam can help you there as well. But more importantly, it gives you the ability to protect your organization while documenting and keeping everything nice and neat. So we've got a really special offer for you. If you go to companycam.com/dominate, not only will you get your 14-day free trial, but you're also going to get the first 2 months 50% off. So again, head on over to companycam.com/dominate, get the app, and I'm sure you're going to love it. So we're back. So this is fun so far because there's like so much going on. But yeah, so, talk to us about, some of the things that you've seen that so far the APA has had a role to play as far as some changes. What are you pushing for right now? Is there anything that you guys are really focused in on that you see is happening in the arena, in the insurance arena, that's kind of got you all hot and bothered, and you're looking to pursue something in particular?
Can I pause this and hit your little flag? Because I want to add an addendum to that last discussion that we had.
Sure.
Your reputation is everything. And believe it or not, you have a reputation with the insurance companies and the adjusters that you see. And I have heard from other contractors that, they do very well because they've established a reputation for themselves and their companies that they don't cheat. So therefore, when they meet an adjuster, and there are a lot of markets where you'll see the same adjusters over and over, and you establish a relationship, when you meet an adjuster, they're sort of making the decision. Is this somebody who's honest, sincere? Hey, I know Rico. Rico always does a good job. He would never cheat. And then, you'll have an easier time. And I hear that from people in the industry. Look, back in the 80s, I'm a financial guy. Back in the 80s, everybody read Sun Tzu, The Art of War. And the last line in that book, and I'm paraphrasing, is to the effect of the true art of war is prevailing without having to go to war.
Right.
So sort of a catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And I'm kind of a vinegar guy, maybe too much. But you want to have good business relationships, and you establish your reputation with every single case that you go on. And I think that will make things a lot easier for people, because again, it's about, like what you said, if you wake up and I'm going to get screwed 6 ways to Sunday, and, first of all, it's a rough way to live, right? You're going to have an ulcer very quickly, and your quality of life, you're not really enjoying life that way. And then second of all, when you bring that to the relationship, you go meet an adjuster on a job site or an engineer on a job site, that's coming across. You have started that. You woke up that morning adversarial. Right. So maybe the idea, Steve Patrick has a lot of great ways. I'm not sure if people know him. He wrote a book called Level the Playing Field. He runs a group. He's one of the APA board advisors. But he talks about, how do you say, instead of showing up on the job and being like this with the adjuster, how do we get ourselves like this? Right. And, one of the things he says is, you meet the adjuster and you just say, listen, I know you probably talk to a lot of jerks, on my side of the fence, and I want to apologize right off the bat for that. Because again, I'm sure it's tough for some of these adjusters as well. I can't imagine, running into some of the people that I know and am friendly with, but I can't imagine running into them when they're having a bad day. Right. It would be a rough game. So he sort of establishes a rapport with them right off the bat. And then it becomes, we're not necessarily like this. Now we're like this. What can we do to work together to do the best to make this homeowner, this policyholder whole? That's a better, and P.S., it's the iron fist with the velvet glove. You start off with honey, you start off being collaborative, and then if in turn they're trying to cheat you or trying to cheat the policyholder, then it's time for war.
Right, granted.
Then we're
absolutely right. And again, I think that, and just kind of expand on that again, because we've spoken about this quite a bit on the podcast about, you have to go in with the right mindset as the business owner, as the entrepreneur, as the project manager. You cannot automatically assume that, if you've got someone out there, the adjuster who's doing a roof inspection for you, let's just use that as an example. You can't assume from the moment that you see this guy get out of his vehicle, he's like, oh, I don't like this guy. This guy's going to go ahead and start. He's not going to see any of the damage that I see. Well, look, you don't know a lot of the scenario. Like, you don't know how long this guy's been on the job. You don't know if he's ever seen, this kind of damage that you're trying to help your client out with. You don't know anything. So instead of going in and you already are making all of these assumptions, dude, just take a step back for a second. Take a deep breath, introduce yourself, say, hey, I'm here to help, and just be cordial. That goes a long way. That goes a long way also when you're dealing with the desk adjuster. The desk adjuster, you got to understand, may not have ever been in the field, right? So there's all of these scenarios, but at the same time, that does not mean that just because I'm being nice and I'm being cordial, that I have to get bent over either, right? Hey, look, I'm the pro.
Correct.
I own the business, or I manage this business. These are our standards. This is how we operate. And this is what, is fair. And this is what we want to go ahead and get paid on. You disagree? Don't take it personal. Like as a contractor, I don't really think that you should take it personal, because it's really not personal. It's just, maybe you just had a bad adjuster that day, or, maybe you had a bad engineer who was doing something fraudulent. You didn't catch it, whatever the case may be. That's on them, or that's that one insulated scenario. You could always attack that and just, kind of take it up to the next level, but it shouldn't affect your everyday relationships that you're having with people.
Correct.
So what are some of the things that you're focused on right now at the APA? Do you see anything that's happening in the industry that's coming down the pike that, people, homeowners, contractors, public adjusters should be really focused on some of the potential changes that may be happening in the industry?
A lot of it, what we are focused on is, number one, getting the message out that fraud happens on all sides. We expect it to be enforced on all sides. People are elected and paid to protect the general public from all fraud, not just protect insurance companies. So we want to make sure that that's happening. We want to see parity in licensing, such as with adjusters. If a public adjuster needs X degree of requirements and licensing requirements, the insurance company adjuster should need exactly the same. We're starting to run into problems with CAT adjusters, with people that were a bartender yesterday and today they're an adjuster in a CAT zone, which is a particularly difficult environment, and they have the ability to do a lot of damage. And I understand that there is a degree of, it's hard to find people to deploy to CAT zones, but I also sometimes wonder maybe if the insurance industries are bypassing the more experienced hands for younger, less experienced people because they're easier to manipulate. And so we're seeing quite I'm running into it a lot with in disaster zones. And the APA focuses on fraud in all forms of insurance, one-off fires and a tree fell on your house, et cetera. But we see a lot more of the problems in after disasters, after hurricanes, fires, tornadoes, et cetera. And one of the things we're seeing on the insurance industry is what's called churning. We call it adjuster roulette. People will have 5, 7, 10 adjusters in a very short period of time. They'll start to establish a rapport and a relationship with an adjuster, and they start to know what their situation is. And, they can call and talk to Bob, and he's an empathetic voice on the phone. And then they call the next day, and Bob's gone, and they've got someone new, and they're starting from scratch. I have literally spoken to people like in Louisiana that have had 10 adjusters since Hurricane Ida, which was just 6-7 months ago.
Right. And what you said is so true, because you finally get a relationship going. And again, we're still dealing with people. So this is a relationship business, whether it's a consumer or the desk adjuster that you're talking to. You finally start to come to terms with certain line items. All of a sudden, guess what? Now, like you said, Bob is no longer available. Now you're with Stacy. And Stacy all of a sudden is contesting everything that you already agreed with Bob, and you're kind of right back to ground zero. All of a sudden, here you go. Now you're 3 months, 3 months building that relationship and going back and forth. It's just insane how that happens.
Yeah, and yet you have to imagine how difficult that is for a policyholder who has suffered a loss. Maybe they've lost everything, and maybe they're in a hotel an hour away and they're sleeping, on someone's couch, or, that this is, a lot of these people have suffered a trauma. And there is a real thing with disaster trauma, or even just, if your house burned down and you just escaped with your lives, and maybe you lost one of your pets, or, or maybe it was just a damage to your home, but you're displaced. That's traumatic. And so people just want to have a friendly, collaborative voice. They want what all those TV commercials promise them, that they're going to have nice, friendly, helpful people on their side working for them. And when they get this churning and adjuster roulette, and, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that maybe contractors and attorneys and PAs see that policyholders are not aware of. We see a lot behind the scenes that they're not aware of. Most policyholders don't understand how the insurance fraud prosecution system in America is so one-sided and doesn't really defend them much at all. So another thing we'll see problems with the third-party administrators hired by the insurance carriers, with the adjusters hired by insurance carriers, with the engineers hired by insurance carriers. Not all of them, but again, far too many.
What are some of the problems that you're seeing there with like the TPAs and the engineers?
What we believe is there's probably a bit of check writer bias. Look, some of these are little single, like I get paid, $1,000 to go check out this house, and some of these are $100 million contracts. Right. So, but either way, you're getting paid by that insurance company, and there is a perceived motivation to make that insurance company happy. Part of it is we'll see third-party administrators. A lot of people don't realize the insurance industry has farmed out a lot of their claims process, particularly with a large disaster, because, you have to expand up. So you can't keep 1 million people on staff. So obviously you've got to hire maybe a third-party administrator who's now hiring, a subcontractor, who's now hiring people on Craigslist. There's a loss of quality in the chain of command. But a lot of people don't realize when they're calling in a claim, it's not going to your insurance company. It's going to a third-party administrator. And that third-party administrator sort of gets a feel for what the damage is. They may send an adjuster out, and the adjuster will say, well, here's what we think the amount of damage is. Insurance companies have to keep the amount of the claim on reserve, the anticipated amount of claim, right? It's just an accounting thing. So if they call in and they say, I see about $10,000 of damage here, the TPA calls the carrier, they set the reserve at $10,000. Well, now the game becomes about defending that reserve. And there's a lot of damage that you don't necessarily see when you first go out there. Everybody's got a story where, well, okay, it looked like a little bit of damage. Then we started digging in, particularly with like water damage. Can you see water damage? Can you see mold? Can you see if salt water has intruded and is now eroding the electrical wires and it's a fire hazard? Once you get into a job, you're going to see a lot more. And perhaps that adjuster was a bartender yesterday and took a 3-hour course on adjusting. Or maybe he was just overwhelmed and he didn't do a great job, didn't see. Now he's got to call and say, well, it's not a $10,000 job, it's an $80,000 job. And the TPAs seem reluctant to call the carrier and say, oops, we made a mistake. You hired us and are paying us a lot of money to manage these claims, and we mismanaged this. You've got to change the reserve. So a lot of times it appears that they are now in this process of defense of their initial estimate. And now they'll start to hire engineers and building consultants to come in and start shooting down claims and chopping them down and defending them. And I will tell people that if your insurance company is sending an engineer to your house, look out. I do not believe that insurance companies say, let's spend money on an engineer so we can figure out how to get Mrs. Smith more money.
Right.
I believe that it is an investment, and in many cases it appears to be a tool of denial. So there are certain things we tell people. We see a lot, and I'm going to say this, and I say this all the time. Most engineers are honest, ethical, hardworking people. Engineering is a science of precision. If the measurements are off by an inch, the bridge collapses, right? So they take that very seriously. But there's a little crew that we're seeing. Not so much. They appear to be willing to tell the carrier whatever they want to hear or whatever they perceive the carrier wants to hear to deny a claim. So we tell people, listen, don't kid yourself. If your insurance company is sending an engineer out, if they're sending a second inspector out, you're now at odds. We're not going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya now. Now we are at odds, and you need to behave as though you are at odds. So one of the things we tell people is when an insurance company signs an engineer, you have the policyholder reach out to the insurance company and the engineer and say, one, I want to know what their scope of work that they're being required to do, their inspection. Two, I want to see a copy of their resume or their CV. We see engineers sometimes who are marine engineers inspecting a roof.
Perfect fit.
I want to
Perfect
see
market
what
match.
the qualifications are to inspect my family's most valuable asset.
Right.
And I'm notifying them at this time. I want to see a copy of the report when they're done, because we will see carriers who try to withhold the report. I'm going to deny coverage on your most valuable asset, but I'm not going to show you the tool that I'm using to justify that denial. Right. So you demand to see a copy of the report, and then above and beyond that, you let them know some basic things. One, you cannot come to my house without an appointment. Don't do this, oh, I was just in the neighborhood. You need an appointment to show up on my property. Two, my contractor, my public adjuster, or my attorney, or all three are going to be present while you inspect. And three, your full inspection is going to be recorded, video recorded. My property, I have the right to record anything I want. You're coming onto my property. You do have a legal duty to cooperate as part of your insurance contract, so you don't get in their way. You don't, make their job more difficult, but certainly you're going to record. And you head off a lot of problems. We'll see some engineering firms won't even show up when they're told they're going to be recorded. Or if they're on the job and they start getting recorded, they will leave. Mm-hmm. Look, that's their problem. If I'm doing an honest, ethical job, I have no problem.
What are you hiding? Right, exactly. There should be zero reason as to why you're hiding. And there's been cases, as a matter of fact, that we've spoken on the show where, as a matter of fact, on our legal corner, when we had Lawyer Britt on, where, while she was in depot, supposedly, they were doing, the carrier had sent out an engineer, supposedly a 2-hour inspection. She documented it was only like a couple of minutes that the guy was up in the, in the attic space. And well, how are you supposed to do a thorough inspection in 2 minutes? Like how is that? And then whatever that report said was enough to deny the claim and obviously get it to where it needed legal action. So these are things that happen consistently, and just the presence of being meticulous. And I think that a lot of contractors, as well as homeowners, get uncomfortable with being extremely diligent on documenting things, because look, I think that deep down inside, we're all very, we want to be trusting, and we want to believe that people are actually nice. So we kind of feel scummy when we're like, well, hey, we're going to record and document this entire process just in case. It just feels kind of shitty for a lot of people, right? But as a general rule, sometimes, you need to have that documentation, because that's what could save you.
100%, and there's no reason why anybody should feel bad about that. This is a process. I am telling you, you're being advised by an expert on the proper way to go through this process. The insurance industry and the engineering firms and the adjusting firms and the TPAs have processes and procedures, and they don't feel shitty about it. This is what we do. Right. And it's just like that. So, listen, it's my property. I'm going to protect my property. I'm going to protect my rights. I'm going to ensure that I am treated fairly. I've paid insurance premiums for decades, years, decades, months. It doesn't matter what it is. I have paid for this. I'm not asking for anything I'm not entitled to. But again, as soon as the insurance company is sending out another inspector or an engineer, you should assume that you are at odds, and they are doing that with the intent of protecting their own interests, and there's no reason why you should feel bad about protecting your interests.
Right.
That's all. Just making sure you get a fair deal.
Right. So, and this is maybe a question that may be slightly outside of where you may want to dance on, even though it's still kind of in your realm. From a contractor side, let's talk water mitigation. Let's talk mold remediation. That portion of the restoration industry. As a general rule, homeowner calls us, we go out, we either get an assignment of benefits or work authorization, whatever that documentation looks like. It's really neither here or there. We deliver on a service. Now, the insurance carriers, TPAs, all of these, they have their own mechanism for what they believe is a quote unquote fair price. Well, you can't go to 10 different burger shops and pay the exact same price. You're typically, if you go to 10 different burger shops, you're going to get probably different pricing, right? For whatever reason. So there isn't a quite universal pricing point. And a big topic of discussion is every entrepreneur, every single restoration company kind of has their own system. Like they have their own overhead. Some have 20 trucks on the road. Some have just one. That's a vastly different business model, and prices vary. So where does it fall in the eyes of insurance when they're denying claims to say, hey, this is what the fair market value is. No one's making any more than this. You're not entitled to A, B, and C. And now you start getting into this debate about money and what the contractor's actually worth. Yet, mind you, homeowner in theory has already kind of been taken care of. Like their initial issues have already been taken care of because the contractor floated that cost. But now the contractor's kind of sitting there holding the bag. So where does it fit in the eyes of insurance when you have these price discrepancies? I'm not saying that it's not fair as far as the work that was done, but how do you argue what your worth is as an organization? I mean,
probably not in a position to give that kind of business advice. Obviously, nobody charges the same. Obviously, every professional is entitled to charge what they think they're worth. You get what you pay for. I certainly wouldn't run out and buy the cheapest car. If my daughter needed brain surgery, I wouldn't run out and get the cheapest brain surgeon. Conversely, I might be a little cautious if, here's a median market expense and somebody is 2x or 3x of that.
Granted, right.
Look,
yeah. And we're not talking about the gouging cases here, right? But again, for us a lot on the business side of things. And again, we're not asking you for business advice. We're asking you from your perspective, knowing as much of you as you have dealt with what's happening in the insurance arena. One of the hottest topics for carriers to turn around and tell contractors, and in turn, it's kind of a way of still telling the homeowner, hey, we're not paying for this, right? Is, hey, this price, somebody else could have done it for cheaper. Well, I mean, yeah, I'm sure you could, but this is what our real and fair price points are. And this is, of course, we're making a couple of assumptions here. We're making the assumption that the contractor's honest. We're making the assumption that they didn't fluff the invoice and that they're just trying to, get what their company's legitimately worth. But that always has become like a topic of, hey, well, this is overpriced. We're going to deny it or, take it to the next level. And these comparative estimates. So now they're getting, other, people that they hire to do like a peer review. And of course, while they're sending 100 peer reviews a week to the exact same company, they're getting paid for that. So there's kind of like this vested interest in saying, oh, well, if they send me an estimate, it's 100,000. Well, my estimate's got to be a little bit lower, right? I've never seen a comparative estimate come back higher than the original. Like I haven't seen it. And again, I'd be happy to see that as well.
Well, if it happened, they're not showing it to anybody.
Right. So there's that portion of it, right? Should that be, I guess the core of the question is, should the price, the actual price of what a legitimate contractor is charging to perform this legitimate service, Should that make a difference at all when it comes down to approval and or denial and the settlement of that case?
Yeah, outside of my field. I will tell you what I have seen. I have seen insurers bring in third parties to give quotes to do work that they never intend to do. And say, I can do this job for this much, but they don't actually intend to do, and they don't actually do the work.
Right. At that point, it doesn't matter. Right. So it's kind of like,
That's a
I
problem.
can show up to a job. Yeah, I can show up to a job knowing that I have zero intent to do it and be like, yeah, you know what? On a good day, if I'm really in a good mood and I feel charitable, you know what? I'll do this for $1,500. Meanwhile, I know that I'm not going to do it. So you have these scenarios in the industry that just almost don't make any sense. And this is where I think the homeowners get really upset, because, then there's this whole other topic that shows up, which is, oh, well, is it just because of the price? Is it the wrong contractor? Their contractors could have done it for less. So you enter all of these, they almost like start instilling doubt in what's going on in the claims process, and they make the homeowner question everything.
Some would make the point that that's the purpose of that, to separate the relationship between the contractor and the homeowner. Because again, you have to understand, at the time of a claim, the interest of the insurance company and the interest of the consumer are adverse, right? And it's a zero-sum solution. If that insurance company pays you $1, they lose $1. So it's to their benefit to want to minimize the claim. Conversely, it's the benefit of the policyholder to try to maximize the claim. But, on one side is the insurer, on the other side is the homeowner. Who's on the homeowner's side? Well, the interest of the contractor are aligned with that of the homeowner. And I will tell you, I have no idea what it costs to put a roof on. I have no idea what it costs to repair a wall or flood damage or to mitigate mold. I'm going to rely on my contractor who's going to tell me that. I may not necessarily rely on the person whose pockets the money to pay for it comes out of, because that person does not have my best interest at heart.
Right.
So you can see where if the consumer and the contractor are aligned, then you can certainly see where it might be advantageous to the adverse party to try to break them apart and cast doubt. And P.S., we have had insurance company SIUs call consumers and say, we suspect ABC Contracting Company of committing fraud. You're not a part of that, are you? And it's a intimidation technique. And that's
huge. Could you imagine, with this homeowner, getting that phone call from your carrier?
Terrifying.
I mean, horrible
Terrifying.
Tactics, horrible technique.
And the first thing they're going to think is, whoa, ABC Contractor is dirty and they're trying to get dirt on me. And if I'm affiliated with them, I'm going to wind up getting in trouble. I might as well sever that. And it is a tool, I believe, to sever that relationship. And it's an intimidation tool for the consumer. And I've heard that story over and over and over again, all over the country, by the way.
Right.
And P.S., look, if the insurance company suspects fraud, they absolutely should investigate it. But I have also seen, we had one of our members out west, that if somebody was using that roofing company, when they called in a claim, they already had a relationship, they would be told by their insurance company's claims department, well, we don't adjust that claim. We have a third party that adjusts when that roofing company is involved. And the person from that third party would go out and throw fraud allegations and say, oh, yeah, these people are cheaters, they're dirty, they're committing fraud, and besmirch their reputation. And it was a specific targeting technique against that contractor because they were a market leader. They were charging a decent wage where they could feed their families and afford to pay their employees a decent amount of money, and they were winning cases and they were getting stuff paid for. And it would appear that insurance company actually was targeting them by using this third-party administrator. Every single time a claim that mentioned that roofing company, they got kicked to this TPA who had the same tactics and the same techniques to damage their relationship and their reputation with the consumer.
And this is where being vigilant, not only as a homeowner, but also as a contractor, making sure that you're keeping extremely tight records. Who are you speaking to? When are you speaking to them? What engineers are coming out? What adjusters are you speaking to repetitively? Are you keeping really good track of your numbers? Are you losing business? Are you not losing business? So that way you can start connecting the dots, because it's very easy to miss if you're not keeping a close eye on the playing field. And there's like so many of these stories like you just shared that are happening consistently, that we hear from homeowners as well as contractors that are constantly on the front lines of these issues. So if someone wanted to help with this overall cause and contribute to the APA, like how would they go about doing so?
You can join as a professional member. It's $84 a month. One of the things, you're talking about these different tactics that they're using. Working together is a way. A lot of people will look, and I will always say this, that other business owner who's your competition and you fight to the death for business every day and market share is your best friend. Nobody knows what you go through the way they do. Nobody knows what it's like to try to get clients and manage advertising budgets and hire good people and make payroll. Nobody understands that the way that other business owner does, understands what your life is. And they are your best friend. And a lot of times we find that these tactics that are used by some of the players on the insurance side, they've been doing this all along and they do it to everybody, but we're all in silos and we're not sharing information.
Right.
So being able to sit down, I love people that form little contractor groups, and just basically they get together and they have pizza and beer once a month and they talk about what their issues are. It certainly helps them deliver a better service to the consumer by doing that. And it certainly helps alert them, like, here's what I'm seeing. Here's this adjuster for this one company who uses the same tactic. Because that's what we find when we start investigating and we start looking into, there's somebody who's been doing it. Look, the adjuster from this company didn't show up on your job and become a jerk on Tuesday morning. He's probably been doing that for 5 or 10 years, and he's not that smart. He probably only has 2 or 3 ways that he cheats people. So when we start talking and sharing, and that's one of the ways that what the APA does is we share information. We have specific tools. We have our own, discussion groups. We have a membership portal that people can belong to that you need a login to sign into. We have our own Facebook group that is not monitored. It's only our members to discuss things that are confidential and share and get advice from each other. We also have tools on our website where, one of which we're developing is that it's called AREP, APA Engineer Report Evaluation Program, that you can feed in an engineer report. It's online and it'll ask you a series of questions and we share information. This is how we've caught them cheating in the past. And it points to all of those ways that we've seen them cheating people in the past, and it makes you, because most people get an engineer report, they go right to conclusions.
Right.
And all of the dirt is done in the body.
And by the way, for everybody watching and listening, I'm actually going to leave in the show notes below, if you're listening to the podcast, I'm going to leave a link to this particular tool, the APA Engineer Research and Complaint Portal, right? Yeah. So I'll go ahead and have a link there. And if you're watching, just click the link below the video description. It's going to be there, so that way you don't have to hunt around and try to remember or write anything down. You can just go ahead and click the link and you can go right there and check that out. And then just earmark it or bookmark it in your browser if you ever need to get back to it later on, so you don't forget where to find it. So sorry, I just want to go ahead and give that little disclosure there.
No, it's a very valuable tool, the APA Engineer Research and Complaint Portal. It gives you, a lot of people don't understand that engineers have to report to a state licensing board. And that state licensing board has an ethics requirement. And they have a disciplinary committee for when you violate those ethics. If your engineer just comes out and flat out lies or is violating the principles of ethical engineering, you can file a complaint against their license, and they take that very seriously. So a lot of people don't understand that. Some engineering boards, you have to search to find them. They want a snail mail complaint. Others want an email complaint. There's an online form. It's almost like they built this so that you can't complain. The APA has created one portal where you go to one place. We have the data on all 50 state engineering boards. We have a tool that we have built that you fill out one form and it translates the complaint into what that state's engineering board wants, how it wants to see it, and sends it to them automatically, all for the price of $0. You thank an APA member who pays dues and helps fund this. I mean, we could obviously make money on this. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to help people and make sure they have honest, ethical engineers. There's a tool on there that you can research to make sure that engineer is licensed in your state, because sometimes we catch them not being licensed in the state that they are working in. And there's also a tool on there to track their disciplinary history. A lot of states like Florida keeps disciplinary history online for 5 years. So would it be good to know if your insurance company is sending out an engineer to inspect your job, if they've ever been fined or suspended for unethical engineering or violations of their ethics code?
I'm going to go with yes.
That's all on there, all for free. And that's a very valuable tool. We spent a lot of money with software developers putting all this together. Thank an APA member. That's where your $84 a month goes. That's part of it. We provide this for the general public and for people in the industry to be able to make sure the consumer gets a fair deal. So basically what happens is, if every insurance company has an SIU and all of the fraud cases are turned in by the insurance company SIU, and the insurance companies don't turn themselves in, therefore they never get prosecuted, who's defending us, the consumers who are paying for all of this with our taxes and our premiums? Well, the APA has built the first ever SIU in American history that defends consumers, that defends you and stands up for you. We have hired the nation's top fraud prosecutor. He has a team of seasoned 20, 30-year investigators working for him. We have law clerks that work for them. And it's basically APA members can turn in cases of suspected fraud and have them vetted and investigated by a team of top insurance fraud investigators and prosecutors. And if we find fraud exists, if we find adequate evidence, because evidence is a big thing, we will package it up and we will turn it over to public prosecutors for them to prosecute. But again, on behalf of you, on behalf of consumers and people in the industry.
That's amazing. That's good stuff. Usually, how long does that process take? As far as, from the time that, let's say, a document is uploaded and say, hey, look, I feel funny about this particular case, before, you guys actually get around to taking a look at it. And then, of course, obviously each case is independent of how long you guys have to investigate, but typically how long before you get around to taking a look at the case?
Well, people get notification right away that we've received it. We make sure, you're acknowledged, because we have a lot of people turning complaints to insurance departments and they never hear a thing. It's like the black hole. So we make sure you get acknowledged right away. We assign an investigator. You'll get their contact info. And they can generally look at a case pretty quickly, sometimes a couple of days, sometimes a couple of weeks, and determine, you have to be very careful, because number one, our promise to prosecutors is we will not waste your time with garbage cases. We're not doing spaghetti on the wall.
Right.
Because our reputation is very important. Our prosecutor, Dominic Dugo, his name is, he's our national prosecution coordinator, who is a 30-year deputy district attorney who ran one of the top insurance fraud prosecutions in the country. He always reminds me, he's like, listen, if you turn a bad case over, prosecutor, next time you turn a case over, it might be a great case. They're not going to take it seriously. You establish your reputation with every single criminal referral that you do. So, a prosecutor looks at a case and they look at three things, because it's not like TV where they charge just to, bother you or just to make a point. A prosecutor is obligated not to waste public resources on a criminal charge unless they think they have enough to win that case. So they'll look at it and say three things, basically. One, what is the crime? What is the violation of our state penal code that is alleged to have occurred? Two, what is the evidence that this occurred? Because evidence is huge. And three, what is my odds of proving this to a jury of the defendant's peers beyond a reasonable doubt? A lot of people are used to civil court where the legal standard is preponderance of evidence. If I prove 51% that you're liable, I win that case. beyond a reasonable doubt is much higher. It's closer to 95%. I've got to prove that case. So, you have to have all of those pieces. So there's a lot of times people turn a case in. We know there's fraud there, but they don't really have proof. And we've got to be able to bring it in to a prosecutor, and we have to have proof. So, like I say, sometimes it's a couple of weeks. And then once it goes to a public prosecutor, they have times where they'll take 6 months, a year, 2 years investigating a case, depending on how deeply they have to dig in to go through that. And public prosecutors are like everybody else. Their budget's been cut, they're understaffed, they're underfunded, they're overwhelmed. And so we try to be empathetic about that. But like I say, we're very careful about what we turn. We don't have to arrest every single scoundrel that's out there. Just a few to document that problem happens, and so that all the others know this is, there's consequences for these actions. You can't hide behind your company's lawyers anymore. If you cheat an American family out of their most valuable asset and kick them at one of their most vulnerable times, there's got to be consequences.
Awesome. Well, Doug, thank you so much, man, for spending the time with us here today. There's so much to dig into. It's amazing work, what you guys are doing over there at the APA. I know that, in an hour, we can't go ahead and cover everything that is happening in the industry. But again, thank you so much for spending the time with us here today. And Restoration Nation, by the way, go on to the links located in the show notes below. There's going to be links to the APA, to all the tools that we spoke about, and so much more. Again, if this is a message that resonates with you, if this is, an organization that you want to align with because of the work that they're doing, then make sure that you go ahead and show some support. And as per usual, go on out there, hustle, hack, and dominate.
Industry insiders, the movers and shakers, the hustlers and hackers. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. Hook up with us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Restoration Domination to catch video interviews, highlights, and behind-the-scenes content. And follow your host at Rico Garcia Jr. Till next time, this is Restoration Domination. Hustle, hack, dominate.